Okay, good afternoon. So as Ewan said, I present here fairly regularly, or get asked to present fairly regularly. I'll be perfectly honest, I was kind of expecting a different audience this time. Just to go over again what Ewan did earlier. Is there anyone here who's representing the wind farm operators, the renewable energy companies themselves? Is there any, just Ewan, is there anyone who represents the gangway manufacturers or suppliers? Okay, so I've pitched this at those people. So you may have seen some of this stuff before because I've covered it in previous presentations. The idea behind this was to go through some of the legislation that applies to gangway operations and talk a little bit about why it is that HSE look at things in a particular way and what the law requires of anyone really who's involved in gangway operations. Before I go on to that, we'll just very briefly talk about the sort of bigger picture as far as HSE is concerned. You may not be aware of this. Just like you guys in your organisations, we have corporate statements and mission statements and goals and objectives and visions and all this good stuff. One of them is keeping pace with change and innovation and new and emerging risks. So walk-to-work gangways, even though they've been in use for at least a decade, really now we're seeing the amount of gangways in use ramping up considerably, mainly because of what's going on in the renewables industry. We need to enable industry to innovate safely to prevent major incidents and support the move to net zero. So we're an enabling regulator. We don't just come around and shut down operations. The whole point is that you can talk to us so we can work through issues and take a more collaborative approach to keep industry moving forwards. And we need to balance this against our main objective, which is to keep people safe whilst they're at work. So you can see that gangways sits perfectly in the middle of that Venn diagram there. So it's an important subject because we know that the gangway is here to stay. It's only going to evolve and change, and the objective is to try and use it in more challenging weather conditions and further offshore, etc., etc. So we know it's here to stay. I'm an advocate of the gangway compared to other methods of getting offshore, but it's very important that we're not putting people at risk whilst we're using them. And we keep that pace of change a little bit in check just to make sure that we're not rushing to make these machines as efficient as possible or as much uptime as possible, but we also consider the fact that there are human beings who are going to be walking across it. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. I suspect you're probably more than familiar with all of this stuff here. The point is that I'm making is that it's the duty is on you guys as employers to keep your employees safe so far as reasonably practicable, and it's also your job as anyone that's involved in the operation of a gangway to keep people who aren't your employees but who may be affected by your undertaking, by the operation that you're undertaking. So that would be contractors, and that could also be other work parties or vessels or other activities in the vicinity that can be affected by what it is that you're doing. One that you may be less familiar with is Section 6 of the Health and Safety Work Act, and that's the duty on designers, manufacturers, importers and suppliers of any article for use at work, and that would be equipment. So the duty on them to obviously design the equipment to reduce risks to those who use it, so far as reasonably practicable, to test it, to provide the users of the product with enough information so they can use it safely, And if they discover anything afterwards that they need to bring to the attention of the users, then the duty is on them to provide that information as well. So the point of this is that regardless of where you sit in the operation, at some point it is likely you will have a legal duty on you to keep people safe. The activities outside a great bit in order, that's the piece of legislation that extends those duties under health and safety work out to the work sites that we're interested in. So Article 4 talks about offshore installations, and Article 9 talks about the production of energy from water or wind, and you can see that it applies in designated areas, it applies in offshore installations, and it applies in activities in connection with offshore installations from Article 4, whether carried on from the installation itself or from a vessel or in any other manner. So again, even if you're the ship operator, for example, if part of what you're doing is the operation of that gangway, then it's considered a connected activity, you fall under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And that's a very important point that the wind farm operators and the vessel operators need to be aware of. Because there's often a little bit of surprise that why is it that it's a maritime activity, why is it that HSE are down investigating this and serving notices, etc., etc. Well, it's because of this legislation, because we are the regulator for these activities. Article 9, it effectively says the same thing in slightly different words. Designated area and renewable energy zone is exactly the same place. Don't ask me why they call it different things. It is the exclusive economic zone, and largely it's the continental shelf. And I've put a point down here. It doesn't need to be physically connected. So any connection, a command and control connection or a risk connection. So if the activity on one can affect people on another structure, even if it's not physically connected, then it is a connected activity. So it spoke in the AGBRO about prescribed provisions. Prescribed provisions aren't just the sections of the Health and Safety at Work Act. They are also regulations that sit underneath the Health and Safety at Work Act. So I've picked some out here that are of particular relevance to us. So Management of Health and Safety at Work Regs, 1999. So I'm sure in your organisations you'll have a plan, do, check, act kind of philosophy built in there somewhere. You might call it something a bit different. The management regs, regs 2, 3 and 4, 3, 4 and 5, basically put that into legislation. They're written differently, but it is the same principle. Assess the risks, identify safeguards to put in place, make sure those safeguards are based on the principles of risk prevention, and then have a process to monitor the effectiveness of those safeguards. You can't just put them in place and think that's job done. It's an ongoing process. I should also say that management of health and safety work regs, it doesn't concern itself with major accident hazard in any way, which is why it's relevant to this activity, and it's why it's relevant to the renewables industry. Pure. So just a reminder that you can read through Pure. Just like any of this legislation, it makes you go slightly cross-eyed as you're reading through it. You read through Pure and you may be mistaken for thinking actually it doesn't apply to ship's equipment. But actually, if that ship's equipment is being used for the purposes of those two articles I showed you earlier, Article 4 and Article 9, so if it's being used in relation to an offshore oil and gas platform, or if it's being used in relation to an offshore wind farm, Pure does apply. So your gangways will fall it's highly likely your gangways will fall under Pure. For those who are, well, there's none of you here, but involved in the construction of offshore wind farms, CDM is of relevance, and of course the Work Hire Regs 2005. So, what incidents are we aware of? And I say that because we don't get to hear about the incidents that happen outside the UK, or at least there's no formal process for notifying us of incidents out in the UK. We hear through the grapevine, we hear through our discussions with other regulators. And we don't get to hear about any near misses unless it's a responsible operator who chooses to inform us. So back in 2017, obviously we had the high profile event with, as Jim was saying, there was some real severe injuries to a gentleman crossing a gangway. Not long after that, there was a high potential near miss whereby someone was crossing onto an offshore oil and gas platform. They were going to unlock the railing, and then luckily they were stood on the kind of the edge of the platform rather than the gangway itself, because the gangway retracted from behind them, and they found themselves standing on the wrong side of the railing, looking down at a hefty drop behind them. They were able to get across and over the railing, so no injuries occurred. Then we had another foot entrapment issue in the renewables sector just before 2023. Again, someone's foot got crushed, and it was, again, horrific injuries to the person's foot. And then we had the auto retraction incident. Obviously, I've anonymized all of these, but we had the auto retraction injury at a wind farm. A person was crossing the gangway, they got to the tip, the gangway retracted, the person went off the tip. They fell about 20 meters into the sea, suffered facial fractures and other injuries, and had to be rescued from the sea. Interesting point, if that happened while they were transferring to an oil and gas platform, it would have been RIDDLE reportable. Because they were transferring to a renewable energy structure, it wasn't RIDDLE reportable. It kind of, just a small point about how it is difficult for legislation actually to keep up as well with these, the rapid pace of change. So after the incident involving we had one unplanned extension. So this was when the tip, it was a push-on gangway, the tip lifted, extended out into the structure. Nobody got hurt, but there was some damage to both the gangway and to the structure. So after these events, we felt it was necessary to publish safety notice to 2024. And as was mentioned earlier, this dealt with entrapment and falls, but mainly entrapment, because that was where we'd seen the most serious injuries. It was almost, I'm not going to say it was an afterthought, but we felt that we'll focus on the entrapment, and then actually, while we got the opportunity, we should put something in here about auto retractions as well. So when I talk about the management, health and safety work regs 3, 4 and 5, this is basically just expanding on those regulations and putting some specifics in for walk-to-work gangways. So assess the risks. Now you'll notice what we've asked for is that manufacturing suppliers to identify the hazards assessed of the risks that are present on their gangways. And that's also written into Section 6 of the Health and Safety Work Act. We saw that. But what we've also said is operators and duty holders should confirm that a suitable and sufficient risk assessment has been undertaken. So, again, Jim kind of alluded to this point. We know that risk assessments get done by the manufacturer, but what we were finding was there were quite highly technical risk assessments, obviously with these very sophisticated machines. They were being given to the operators of the gangway, and they were ticking the box and saying, yes, we've had our risk assessment, so we've done what we need to do. But no one was really looking through the risk assessment in any technical detail. And so it was somewhat of a surprise to some operators when they suddenly discovered that, our gangway can retract without warning, even though it was written into the risk assessment. So operators and duty holders should confirm that a suitable and sufficient risk assessment has been undertaken. It's not enough just to get it. You have to assess whether it's suitable and sufficient. We also said that you need to consider the possibility of a person stumbling or falling. And this talks to what Jim was saying about the speed of retraction. The concern for us was that the emphasis on design is protecting the machine, getting it away from the structure as quickly as you can. But that motion in itself could induce someone to fall. And we know that when we look at entrapment risks, We don't want to just focus on the obvious places where you put your hands and your feet when you're walking across. We need to consider the possibility that someone has stumbled or fallen, and where might they shove their hands on or their feet. So it goes beyond just looking at the obvious pinch points. And importantly, the final bullet point was what we expect is everyone to be working together on this, have some collaboration between all the parties, because as I mentioned at the beginning, at some point you all have a legal duty. We also spoke about instruction and training, so people need to be instructed on how to cross the gangway and how to behave and how to react to various events. Importantly, people who operate the gangway also need to be trained. So we saw incidents where the gangway operator on their console was seeing messages from the gangway system, but it's a bit like DP systems. The message that came in was a very technical message, and the operator was thinking, I can't, that's not plain English, I can't interpret how serious that's telling me the fault is. Can I continue operating this gangway for the short term, or do I need to attract this thing straight away? So it's training in how to use the gangways, but also training in what to do if you do get an emergency event. How do I override an auto retraction, for example, if I can see that there's somebody at the tip and I know the gangway's about to move? And it talks to inspection and maintenance and making sure the gangway is always in good working order. And we put the thing in about auto retraction, and I thought this was relatively clear, that the gangway should not auto retract unless there's audible and visible warnings that allow users sufficient time to make themselves safe before the auto retraction occurs. So then in 2025, we got notified there was a near miss. So a gangway, this was an oil and gas platform, a gangway operator. Someone was crossing the gangway at the time. There was a fault was developed within the software or within the control program. And the gangway retracted in order to protect itself. And in this case, the oil and gas company was very surprised that no one got a warning that it was about to happen. And if there was a warning, it was less than a second between alarm and gangway moving. And that's when they went back and looked at the risk assessment and looked at the various documents and said, oh, actually, it does kind of imply in here that's what's going to happen, but no one really looked at it in detail. But being a responsible operator, they did inform us, and that helps us have these conversations with you. So anyway, the result of that was that we felt that actually we need to put out another safety alert. So this was just a couple of months ago we put this out. It dealt with one issue, which was the auto retraction issue, and this time it said the same as the first safety alert, except we'd added a little bit more detail to it. So what we said, if it's found that the gangway can retract without sufficient warning, then it should not be used. So that's the first message, really, I suppose, for you guys, is you need to be comfortable that if you are using a gangway, that it cannot retract without there being sufficient warning. And if it can, you shouldn't be using it. And just to kind of emphasize the point, my colleague in the Wind and Marine Energy team, she wrote to G+, just after we put this out and made it absolutely clear, if we see a gangway that can retract without there being sufficient warning, then we will prohibit its use. And you can argue the case with us, but you'll be doing it while the ship's in port. So much more cost effective for you guys to go out and check first and put suitable controls in place before we have a look at it. And we went so far as to say a warning by definition is advance notice that the event is about to occur. Because again, we were kind of seeing that there were some manufacturers who they felt they'd complied by putting a warning in, but it simply wasn't enough time. I mean, we're talking like a second and a half, for example, to react to the gangway lifting and then retracting. Now, we didn't stipulate how much time is necessary because, well, a couple of factors. First of all, it would have taken a lot of work to come up with, a lot of human factors work to come up with a figure. I know that the DNVGL standard gives a bit of guidance of no less than 5 seconds. That's what they recommend. But for us, we felt that it would delay us putting out the safety alert by quite a significant period of time, and we knew there were gangways in use that we weren't comfortable with, so we felt it was more important to get the gangway out. And the second factor is that actually it depends very much on the gangway design. Some will require longer, particularly if you have the elephant's foot style gangway where you have steps to climb down. That will take longer to clear the steps than it would, for example, a push-on gangway. So that's why we haven't stipulated the time. But what our expectation would be was that part of the assessment of your gangway would be that you would look at that and actually do some tests and see whether the delay is sufficient. And we also said that duty holders should carry out a technical risk assessment to understand all the operational states of the control system and when and how, what might trigger an auto retraction. And importantly, include within the control system a function which will only result in auto retraction if personnel are not at risk. So in other words, you need to be able to override any automatic retraction. You need to be able to override that if the operator sees that, well, actually there is somebody at the tip of the gangway. So the conclusion, and I'm rattling through this. How much time have I got left, by the way? The conclusion to this was we had some good conversations with gangway manufacturers. I mean, as you'd expect from this industry, people were more than happy to, especially those that actually had delays built into their gangways, and there's some that had learned the hard way. Their delays, they were more than comfortable to come and talk to us. I've said with some gangway manufacturers, because we haven't had conversations with all of them, but we focus on those that we know are operating in the UK at the moment. And we pick it up at inspection. One of the issues, one of the difficulties we have, the challenges, is that so I counted 9 gangway manufacturers when I had a look at this just recently. And there's more coming onto the market regularly. As the market expands, there's more coming onto the market. So trying to keep up with these different designs and these innovations, and that's just gangways. It doesn't include personnel transfer capsules, and it doesn't include bringing to work, the Minecraft trolley that goes up and down. Or it doesn't include the Get Up Safe system, the winch, the personal winch system. So there's all these innovative ways of getting people onto these structures, and we're trying to keep up with all of that. And particularly renewables, it's difficult because it's a non-permissioning regime. We don't have safety cases. We have seen some really good examples of positive modifications. So one, the gangway that had 1 second delay, the manufacturer went away. They said, actually, we can increase that. Now, they put a 3-second delay in, which you may think sounds, again, incredibly short. But actually, when you see the video, and I can't put the video on because you'd recognize the manufacturer, and I don't want to do that. But when you look at it, you think, oh, actually, it's a push-on type. It is a relatively quick process to step back from the tip or to continue across. And what they also did, they slowed the acceleration down. So it went from immediately hitting 1 meter per second to a much slower, again, to try to prevent the kind of someone tumbling and then either falling or putting their hands and feet where they didn't want them to put them. It has prompted open discussion and collaboration across industry, so that's part of why I'm here today. It's part of that kind of continuing that conversation, because honestly, even though it possibly sounded like I was wagging my finger a bit, and I suppose I was, but we don't want to prohibit people's operations. We want industry to continue. We want to keep these wind farms in operation and these offshore platforms in operation. So the best way to do that is to make sure that we all work collaboratively to remove these risks from these machines. And as you'll probably all be aware, I'm not saying that IMCA wrote the guidance based on our safety alert, but certainly it helped focus some of their attention on some aspects of the guidance they've put together. And now they've actually, when you read the section on auto retraction in the updated IMCA guidance, it's a very well described process. So from our perspective, we're going to continue to include gangway design and operations in our inspection agendas. So I gave a presentation earlier this week to team leaders and senior management at HSE, and part of the point of that was to make all inspectors aware of this issue. So regardless of whether you're a specialist like myself or whether you're any other inspector, if you go to an oil and gas platform or a wind farm and they're using a gangway, you know what questions to ask. So if you're using a gangway, you can expect to be asked questions about it. Re-emphasise the point, if we do find gangways that we do not consider to be safe, we're going to prohibit their use. So if you are in that camp, or if you're not sure, or you want to discuss it, come and talk to us, because I'm hoping that, because it sounds like the majority of oil and gas, you know already that you can, there are avenues that you can talk to us directly in exactly the way that Shell did and Jim did. As soon as they identified issues, they had a conversation with us, and it turns out that we were all on the kind of the same wavelength, and we all had similar concerns. That's it.
Thank you very much. Despite me being the audience for your presentation.
The only person, yeah.
Thankfully that wasn't well, I don't know if it's thankful or not, but it certainly wasn't the first time I'd heard that. We had Paul's colleagues on multiple Teams calls in the office and went through all this. We certainly felt the pain of maybe learning the hard way. Thankfully not because we'd injured somebody, and I think that's the positives we took from it, that we managed to put a few changes into our operations that will hopefully prevent that happening at all, but work certainly isn't finished. Nope. And yeah, we'll continue work. As Jim said, it's that call to action to see what comes next. The safety notice telling us what not to do isn't the final answer here. We need to work as an industry across both sides to get some sort of paper or governing documents in place to say this is how we're going to do this as an industry, and hopefully that is the thing that we'll take HSE on that journey with us, and move forward. Any questions for Paul?
Hi. So in the oil and gas industry, we've just gone back to your man overboard incident that you had at the start. Obviously, we've got a lot of requirements and performance standards that we have for rescue and recovery of people from the water and emergency situations, and we cover that with the ERV that we've got in the field. Are there any requirements for that in the offshore sector for performance standards for recovering people from the water or emergencies on the renewable asset?
I'm very glad you've asked that question, actually. So the answer is sort of. So when we started getting involved, when I started getting involved in the renewable side of things a couple of years ago, quickly realised that there were no standards in place. Equally, we're aware that we cannot just import standards across from oil and gas if they're not directly translatable into the renewables industry. So what we're working with the industry at the moment. We've introduced this concept of performance standards with them, and it took a little while to kind of get that concept moving. But what we're pushing now is that each wind farm operator, we did suggest they did what oil and gas did and come up with a single standard, because falling in the water in the southern sector is pretty much the same as falling in the Irish Sea or anywhere else. The risk is the same. They didn't want to work collaboratively together to come up with a single standard, so we said, fine, you need to come up with your own individual ones then. So every time we do an inspection, that's front and centre of the inspection, and we are seeing now a definite movement and momentum being picked up by industry itself, who are after quite a degree of time kind of pushing them, they've realised, I kind of get it now. I get the whole point of performance standards, because it drives what we need to have, as opposed to what have we got and how can we use it to pick people out of the water. We start with the performance standard, and then that determines the arrangements we need to have in place. So now we're seeing some of the big operators who are saying, I get it now. They've started writing these standards. There's a work group through the URI forum that are kind of running with this. And the smaller operators, obviously, are going to react to what the bigger operators are doing, and then the industry, the whole standard across the industry will pick up. But it's been a painful process. I'll be honest, but we are beginning to see the fruit. But I'm glad you asked the question, because one of the reasons I didn't have quite as much time to prepare for the presentation this time was because we've just served a PN. I'm not going to go into any detail because it's just been served this week on a renewable operator who was flying people. And when we looked at their means of rescue and recovery in the event of a helicopter coming down, it wasn't suitable and sufficient as far as we were concerned. So we've prohibited them from flying above the sea conditions in which they can actually demonstrate that they can rescue people, which is fairly benign. You'll see it will come out in the next few weeks. You'll see it because it will go onto the public register, so you'll get more details. But that's where we are with them at the moment. We've kind of worked with them to take them to a certain point, but we're also saying if we're seeing stuff that isn't right, we're not going to, we're not going to sit down and have a lengthy conversation. We're going to take enforcement action. That's on us. That's why we're here. Likewise, one of my colleagues almost served a PN on the gangway because she wasn't comfortable with the measures that were in place to prevent people getting entrapped in it. Now, in that case, the operator decided to take the vessel out of service and actually took the vessel out of the UK. So the point is that we're happy, we'll take a collaborative approach, we'll work with industry with things like performance standards, but at the same time, we're a regulator. So if we see something that's not right, we have to take action.
Hi, thanks. Ben Hukins from Global Maritime here. A couple of questions, if I can sneak them both in. The first one might be for a wider audience. So we normally put these gangways on DP2 vessels, and we have a lot of specific requirements for DP2 vessels. Single failure can't result in loss of position. Yet we've heard that with the gangways, a single failure can result in immediate. So we have all this effort on maintaining position, but we don't apply the same standard to the gangway. And touching on what Jim was saying earlier, when you have a redundancy, you can give people a lot more time and comfort to make a safe. So is there ever any thought or consideration given into making gangways redundant? And the second question, from your conclusions there, it sounds like a lot of good progress and improvements have been made. So do you now think that alert requirement from design manufacturers you mentioned at the start of your presentation is being met?
It differs between, to answer the second part first, it differs between manufacturers. And as I say, we haven't spoken to everyone yet. We're trying to focus on those that are in the UK. And actually it also differs between designs of gangways. So I would say that we are making progress. There is it's hard work. We're having to have lengthy conversations to kind of go through what I just went through, which is what the law requires them to do. Because a lot of gangway manufacturers, the engineers that are involved in these, and I know because I've been to the factories a number of years ago, and they are very, very clever engineers. But it's all about the machine. And when you speak to them, their machines can't fail. Or if they can fail, they'll do it very safely. But actually, when you look at it from a slightly different perspective and you remove a bit of that engineering optimism and you start looking like we do at kind of worst case and actually what could happen, you find that there's a slight gap between what their expectation is and what ours is. So I can't say at the moment that for certain gangways that we've looked at, we've been happy for them to continue using. So in that regard, you could say we've reached a LARP. What is missing is something that Ewan spoke about earlier. What's missing is industry standard, because a lot of that forms what is a LARP. We need to agree ourselves on what measures should be in place, using the collective knowledge and experience of people like yourselves, and that's kind of missing at the moment. And there's a little bit of a vacuum on who's actually going to produce that. Obviously, DNVGL have produced standards, but again, when you look through that, there's some ambiguities in there. It can be interpreted slightly differently. And also, you see a gangway that's presented with the DNVGL certificate, but actually when you look at it, you think, well, how does it really meet all the standards that you've claimed it does? So there's a question there for the classification societies on how exactly are they testing against their own standards. And there was a first part of the question, and I forgot what that is because I spent too long answering the second part. Oh, FMEAs, sorry, it was FMEAs. And yes, we are looking at it. We can't prescribe, you have to do an FMEA, but we would expect the FMEA to be sufficiently in depth that it does identify all those failure modes and what's in place to mitigate. So that's the sort of thing that not myself, but a specialist in our our electrical control and instrumentation team would look at when doing an inspection, for example. But as Jim was saying, the quality of FMEAs differs, and it all around should be improved, really.
I will take one more before we stop for a coffee break.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for your insight. It was very, very useful, very good. Thank you. I've got a question. I mean, I'm a fan of MOT and regulation. The gangway, is there any specific interval, maybe that's for Jim as well, in terms of making sure that it's properly maintained and inspected and audited? Is there a prescribed timeline?
I don't think so. It's not like Lola, where you have a prescribed timeline. I'll need to look through Pure. I think Pure talks in more general terms, and maybe someone else can put me right here. I think Pure talks in more general terms about the duty to make sure it is maintained and inspected at regular intervals, but I would probably need to get back to you on the technicalities or exactly what Pure requires.
Okay, thanks again, Paul. We'll stop for a short comfort break just now, approximately 30 minutes. Yeah.